Daniel Boone's first decade in Missouri. He was by no means chairbound. He was old, but he was by no means chairbound, and he still enjoyed hunting and tramping in the woods, and usually went out in the company of one of his relatives, a hunter and trapper named Jim Davis. Boone and Davis frequently made trips of more than 150 miles and out west to Howard County, where there were salt licks, and after the salt had been boiled down, they would fetch it home to supply the Boone community. But as the seasons rolled by, and Boone approached his 80th year, he felt less inclined to endure the hardships of a winter hunt. Like an old hunting dog, he stayed by the fireplace during the cold months, and Davis went out alone on his treks to the western forests. He would often be away for several months of trapping at a time. Now, the western part of Missouri was occupied at this time by the Oto Indians, who, according to tradition, originally were part of the Winnebago tribe. Along with the bands later known to the white man as the Iowa and the Missouri, they had separated from the mother tribe at Green Bay, Wisconsin, and migrated to the southwest in search of buffalo. Their permanent villages located in the county south of the Platte consisted of a large earthen lodges, but they lived in skin teepees while traveling and while they were on hunting expeditions. Though not especially savage or warlike, the Oto resented the white man's encroachment on their hunting grounds, and who could blame them, and could make it very uncomfortable, to say the least, for any trespasser unlucky enough to fall into their hands, which Mr. Davis did. On a hunting trip in 1813, Jim Davis found this out the hard way. He was captured by a party of Oto Indians, who expressed their objection to his presence by relieving him of his collection of pelts, his tinderbox, gun and ammunition, and every stitch of clothes that the man had on. In the bitter weather, with the nearest settlement more than 100 miles away, it seemed obvious to them that he would freeze to death, and taking his clothes not only appealed to the Oto sense of humor, but also would expedite the freezing process. And as a final gesture of disdain and mockery, one of the braves thrust into Davis's hand an old British musket and loaded with a single charge, and then the party went on its way, leaving poor Jim to his fate naked as a jaybird. Now, poor Jim cut a sorry spectacle, standing there in the blowing snow, naked, clutching his rusty musket, the mocking laughter of the Indians echoing in his ears. But he'd be hanged if he was going to turn into an icicle to oblige some pesky Indians. He had to admit it was a mite drafty there in the woods, though. But still, he had a gun and one shot, and if he could just survive till morning, he reckoned he might make it out somehow. Now, the first order of business was to look for a shelter where he could spend the night. And there was a stream nearby, and while exploring under the shelving rocks along its bank, he spotted a hibernating bear holed up for the winter. Now, here was his opportunity, not giving himself time to think of the consequences should he miss, or if the gun should flash in the pan and not actually fire. He crawled up until the old smooth bore was almost against the bear's head. Then he fired, and the bear tumbled over, and Jim's outfit was now augmented by one dead deer. To the hunter, the bear represented a potential supply of food and clothing. The problem was how to get at it. Removing his gun flint from the musket, Jim used it for a crude knife to take the hide off the animal, splitting down the inside of the hind legs and pulling the pelt over the bear's body as he skinned it. Once the hide was free, he drew the furry covering over his own body, inserting his arms where the bear's front legs would be, and his feet where the bear's feet or back legs would have been, and his head he put into the actual head of the furry covering. So by inserting himself in from the cold, next he contrived to rig moccasins from the bear's hind feet. Then, warm and snug, at last, he lay down beside the former occupant of the skin and the hide and had a good night's sleep. As soon as it was light, Jim cut off as many bear steaks as he would need on his homeward journey, and he started off. And for 3 days he struggled doggedly eastward through the snow and the wilderness. Without steel or a tinderbox, He could not make a fire, but the bearskin kept the cold out, and the meat, though eaten raw, sustained him. That had to be tough. On the evening of the third day, he arrived at the outskirts of the settlement and turned in at the first house he came to, the home of Jonathan Bryan. Now, Bryan's house was actually two cabins connected by a breezeway, and in one of the cabins there lived a boarder, an elderly itinerant Scotchman, who, in the absence of a regular school, had established an academy and assumed the title of professor. When Jim trudged wearily up the pathway, it was not yet candle lighting time, and the old gentleman was sitting alone, half dozing by the fire. Now, the latch string was always out on the frontier, not thinking of any sensation his appearance might create. Jim did not stand on ceremony. He pushed the door open and started in, and hearing the door creak, the old professor came up with a start. And there was enough light so that he could plainly see the outline of an animal-like figure in the open doorway. Now, for a moment, he just sat there, possibly hoping that this evil apparition was a bad dream. But when it started towards him, the man of learning shot to his feet and tore out of the room, crying, "The devil has come! The devil has come!" at the top of his voice. I can only imagine what he would have felt seeing Mr. Davis walk in that bearskin. And in the passageway between the cabins, he collided with Jonathan Bryan, who went in to confront the monster and recognized him as Davis. After Bryan succeeded in calming the old Scotchman, the two of them went to the aid of their guest. And during the 3-day trek, the bearskin had begun to dry up and shrink, shaping itself actually to Davis's body. It took considerable effort on the part of both men to extract the valiant hunter from his furry suit and restore him to human shape. Now, Jim Davis's remarkable adventure and his ingenious method of saving his life, to say nothing of the scare he had given the schoolmaster, made him forever famous in that part of Missouri. His exploit was not unworthy of Daniel Boone himself, and we can be sure that during the 7 remaining years of Daniel Boone's life, he had heard this unique story about the bear told on many, many occasions. Now, I have a personal story to share with you. I'm kind of embarrassed by this, but I'm going to let you know. I'm going to tell you about it anyways. Back in the late 1960s, I was in my early teens. I was working for a newspaper, the Bridgeport Future, and I had just established the Bridgeport Historical Society there in Bridgeport, Michigan. And people were always giving me old things that would ultimately be displayed in a museum when it opened. And one of the things was a full-length bearskin coat, and it hailed back to the early 1900s. Well, I used to watch Dark Shadows as a kid, and I got this crazy idea that I would terrorize the village as the Werebear at night. So I put that coat on after it was dark. I'd jump on my Stingray bike, and I'd pedal out, and that coat would be blowing behind me, and I had this whole scenario in my mind to make believe the story built up around it. So if you hear of a werebear-like creature in the annals of Bridgeport, Michigan history, it's no mystery. It's just a crazy 13-year-old having fun in a very weird way. I hope you enjoyed the story. I think it is very unique, and God willing, I'll be back with you all real soon. God bless you. I love you all behind that monitor. See you soon. God bless.